Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of a written record that we have.
In a quiet gallery in Philadelphia, a cracked clay tablet no bigger than a playing card sits behind glass.
Here is a Sumerian tablet that actually shows the tree of life, flanked by divine beings. You can see here the Anunnaki on each side.
Ignored by almost everyone who passes it. Its faded, wedge-shaped symbols seem insignificant. But when scholars finally decoded the full text, they uncovered something astonishing. Not one forgotten Sumerian story, but two intertwined narratives buried for thousands of years beneath silence, dust, and history itself. The holy city under the sand Nippur was never the political capital of ancient Mesopotamia. No conquering king built his throne there. No empire chose it as its administrative center. What Nippur was, for thousands of years, was something more durable than a political capital. It was the sacred heart of the Sumerian world, home of the great Ekur temple complex dedicated to Enlil, the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon. In the late 19th century, the University of Pennsylvania launched the first American archaeological expedition to Mesopotamia. Teams of excavators worked trench by trench through massive mounds of sun-baked brick in brutal southern Iraqi heat, sometimes for months at a stretch, pulling objects from the ground that had not seen daylight in thousands of years. What they found in Nippur's scribal quarter was unlike anything anyone had prepared for. House after house in the scribal district was packed with clay tablets. Not hundreds, thousands. The archaeologists who worked through the site later compared it to discovering a national library buried under its own ruins. The scribes of Nippur had been meticulous record keepers, and the building material of their records, baked clay, had kept those records intact through everything that had happened above ground since the city fell. Thousands of tablets were shipped to Philadelphia, Istanbul, London, and Berlin. They were cataloged, filed, and placed in storage. And then overwhelmingly, they sat. The reasons were practical, but consequential. Many tablets were fragmentary, broken into pieces that could only be read by cross-referencing fragments, held in different museums on different continents. The volume of material was simply too large for the relatively small community of specialists who could read ancient cuneiform. Scholarly attention tended toward the more complete administrative, royal, and economic texts where the returns on investment of translation time were more predictable. The literary tablets, the ones carrying stories rather than records, waited. The translators who made it possible, the first person to recognize that something significant was sitting in the Nippur collection, was a German scholar named Arno Pobel, who in 1912 worked through the Philadelphia material and identified one damaged piece as carrying content far beyond a simple administrative record. He published a rough translation that drew some attention but did not produce a sustained wave of follow-up study. In the 1950s, the legendary Sumerian scholar Samuel Noah Kramer briefly noted the tablet and described its significance in terms that should have generated immediate sustained attention. It did not. Decades passed. The tablet sat. The breakthrough came in stages. In the 1980s, Thorkild Jacobsen pulled together the overlapping fragments from multiple cities and museums and named the flood composition the Eridu Genesis. The tablet in Philadelphia became its primary witness, but the full scholarly edition that the material deserved still did not exist. Modern tools changed what was possible. Raking light photography, where light is directed across a surface at a very low angle, throws shallow impressions into sharp shadow and makes wedge marks visible that are effectively invisible under normal lighting conditions. Three-dimensional scanning allows researchers to study the surface of a tablet from any angle without touching it. Computer vision and pattern recognition systems trained on cuneiform signs can identify damaged or tightly packed characters with a speed and accuracy that manual study cannot match. Work that once took weeks now takes hours. A second major tablet from the same Nippur collection, cataloged as Ni 12501 and held in Istanbul, had been photographed for the dust jacket of Kramer's 1956 book and then set aside completely. No full scholarly edition of it existed for over 60 years after that photograph was taken. Assistant Professor Jana Matuzak of the University of Chicago recently completed the first full scholarly translation of the second tablet and published it in the journal Iraq. Her work opened a story that had been waiting in Istanbul for longer than most living scholars have been working. The world before cities. The The first tablet, the Eridu Genesis, begins in a world that no longer exists and may be difficult to imagine. Its lost opening section, reconstructed from overlapping fragments found at other sites, describes the time when humans and animals had only recently come into existence. People were nomadic. There were no cities, no temples, no fixed places of worship, no rulers with defined territories and specific obligations. Life was mobile, fluid, and from the perspective of the gods watching it, deeply unsatisfying. The gods in the Sumerian understanding of the world required regular care. They needed temples where offerings could be made, festivals conducted, and rituals performed on a reliable schedule. Nomadic humans wandering across the landscape were not providing that. The cosmic order that the Sumerians believed held the world together depended on fixed worship in fixed places, and the humans who were supposed to provide it were instead wandering around being loud and inconsistent. The birth goddess Ninhursag speaks first in the surviving text. Her complaint is not about human wickedness in any moral sense. It is about human disorder. People are wandering. There is no lasting structure. Nothing is stable. Her demand is specific. Humans must settle, build cities, raise temples, and create a world where gods receive proper and regular care, and where people have leaders who are accountable for maintaining the cosmic order. The text then names the 5 original cities of civilization, each assigned a divine guardian. Eridu, the oldest, sits under the protection of Enki. Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak follow. This is not a random geographical list. It is a sacred map, a description of where true kingship and proper worship first took root on earth. Kingship passes from city to city as the text progresses. Rulers rise and fall. Human life grows busier, louder, and more crowded with each generation. And then the gods convene in secret and everything changes. The man who listened through a wall. Ziusudra is the king and priest of Shuruppak, the last city on the sacred list. His double role is significant. As king, he has the authority and resources to act. As priest, he is trained to listen closely to divine communication and to take it seriously when it arrives. He is described in the text as humble and good, the kind of person a god can trust with information that was never meant to be shared. Enki's message, heard through the wall, is direct. A great flood is coming. Build a massive boat. The boat Ziusudra builds is not a fishing vessel or a river craft. It is a large vessel built for one purpose only: to survive what no house or city can survive. The flood, when it comes, lasts 7 days and 7 nights. All winds gather into a single force. The cities are swept away. The great boat is tossed on open water with no land in sight. When the storm finally breaks, the sun god Utu appears and spreads light across sky and ground. Ziusudra opens a window in the vessel, and the text records his response to the first fresh air and light in days as an offering, oxen and sheep sacrificed in gratitude to the sky above him. Anu and Enlil, the 2 highest gods in the Sumerian pantheon, grant Ziusudra eternal life. He is given immortality specifically for preserving animals and what the text calls the seeds of mankind. He is then settled in the distant land of Dilmun, the bright place where the sun rises, and he does not return to the human world. The story does not end with a triumphant return to rebuilt cities and grateful survivors. It ends with the one man who survived being quietly removed from the world he saved and placed somewhere else entirely. The haunting quality of that ending is not accidental. The Sumerians who wrote and copied this text understood what they were encoding. Survival came at a cost. The world was reset, but the man who made it through did not get to live in the world that followed. The story nobody expected to find. The second tablet, Ni 12501, sat in Istanbul for over 60 years after Kramer photographed it for his book cover. When Jana Matusak finally completed its full translation, she found a story that nobody had been expecting to find inside the Nippur collection. The storm god Ekur, also known as Adad, has been captured and imprisoned in the netherworld. The consequences on Earth are immediate and severe. No rain falls. Drought spreads across the land. The natural cycle that governs agriculture, the regular movement of storms that brings water to fields and fills rivers and allows crops to grow, has stopped. Everything that depends on Ishkur's presence in the world is beginning to fail. Enlil, the king of the gods and Ishkur's own father, convenes the full divine assembly. He asks for a volunteer to descend into the netherworld and bring his son back. The assembly is the most powerful gathering in the Sumerian divine world. Gods of thunder, wisdom, war, water, and sky, all of them hear the request. None of them steps forward. The greatest divine beings in the pantheon stand in silence while the world above them dries out and the crops begin to fail. Then a fox volunteers, not a warrior god, not a divine hero with a documented record of great deeds. A small animal, clever and quick, with no standing in the divine hierarchy and no special power beyond intelligence and the absence of the pride that was freezing the gods in place. The fox is the earliest known trickster animal hero in Sumerian literature. The tradition of the clever animal who succeeds where powerful figures fail, which appears in Aesop's fables, in the medieval European tales of Reynard the Fox, and in trickster traditions across cultures on multiple continents, traces its written history back at least as far as this tablet from Nippur. The fox did not invent the concept, but this tablet is the oldest place it is currently documented. The fox's journey into the netherworld uses clever tactics rather than force. The tablet is damaged at exactly the moment where the outcome should be revealed. Scholars who have worked with the fragment cannot confirm whether the fox succeeded, whether Ekur was freed, or whether there are missing pieces of the story sitting unrecognized in a museum storage drawer somewhere. The text breaks off and leaves the question open. 4,400 years later, we still do not know how the story ends. The pattern all the tablets share. Read alone, the Eridu Genesis looks like a simple flood story, while Ni 12:501 feels like a strange tale about a clever fox. But when these texts are placed beside other major Sumerian writings, a larger pattern begins to appear. They stop looking like separate stories and start feeling like parts of one ancient idea about how civilizations rise, collapse, and survive. One of the clearest examples is the lament for the destruction of Ur. Scholars rebuilt it from more than 20 broken clay fragments scattered across museums in Philadelphia, London, Istanbul, Berlin, and Paris. The poem is over 400 lines long and reads almost like a song, repeating the same haunting images again and again. Its speaker is the goddess Ningal, wife of the moon god. She stands inside the city of Ur while watching its end approach. She pleads with the gods Anu and Enlil to spare the city. She reminds them that Ur worshipped faithfully for generations. But the gods remain silent. The poem describes empty temples, silent streets, ruined farms, and families dragged away as prisoners or refugees. These details were not imagined. The text describes the real collapse of the third dynasty of Ur, one of the greatest periods of Sumerian history. Yet the poem continued to be copied in schools for centuries afterward. Students studied it because the fall of one city became a lesson about the fate waiting for every city eventually. The same structure appears in the Curse of Agad. At first, the Akkadian Empire is rich and powerful. Trade fills the roads, and the king Naram-Sin believes his future is secure. Then Enlil suddenly withdraws divine favor. No warning is given, no message arrives. Only silence. Unable to understand that silence, Naram-Sin makes a terrible choice. He attacks Nippur, the holy city, and steals from Enlil's temple. After that comes disaster. Gutian raiders sweep across the land, destroying in months what took generations to build. Harvests fail, roads empty, bandits replace guards. The mighty empire becomes a place people avoid. Placed side by side, all four texts share the same shape. A civilization grows proud, crosses an unseen limit, and collapses without warning. Yet someone always carries something forward into the ruins. A listener, a survivor, or a clever outsider who keeps the story alive. The work that makes translation possible. The full translation of these tablets required a kind of patience and cross-continental coordination that is difficult to fully appreciate from the outside. No single tablet tells the complete story. Reading the Eridu Genesis meant tracking down overlapping fragments held in Philadelphia, London, Istanbul, and Nineveh, identifying which pieces fit together and making careful interpretive choices everywhere the clay was damaged. The cuneiform script alone is a significant barrier. It uses hundreds of signs, each with multiple possible values depending on context. Reading it requires years of specialist training and constant reference to established scholarly tools. Sumerian language itself adds a further layer of difficulty. It is a language isolate with no known relatives among any other language group, which means there is no adjacent language that can be used to cross-check uncertain readings. Matazak's translation of the Fox tablet required deep specialist knowledge of highly poetic early dynastic Sumerian, a form of the language even more archaic and difficult than the standard literary Sumerian of later periods. The fragmentary condition of the tablet meant that every ambiguous sign required a judgment call, and every judgment call had to be defensible against the full body of known Sumerian literature. The sobering reality that her work makes visible is the scale of what remains unstudied. Hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets exist in museum collections worldwide. A significant portion of them have never been fully translated. The Fox story sat in Istanbul for over 60 years after Kramer photographed it. The Eridu Genesis waited decades for a full scholarly edition, despite being recognized as one of the most important Sumerian literary texts ever found. How many more complete stories, theological arguments, historical records, or geographical descriptions are sitting in museum drawers waiting for a specialist with the right tools and enough time to look at them properly? A 4,400-year-old tablet sat in a museum for decades before anyone read it fully. When they did, it contained a flood story with an invisible death sentence handed down in secret, and a trickster fox that volunteered for a rescue mission when every god in the pantheon stood in silence. Both stories are part of the same warning, written in clay passed between scribes for thousands of years. If this kind of history matters to you, subscribe and stay with us for what comes next.